Okay, everyone, welcome back to episode 58 of Tokyo Jazz Joints. Now, not to confuse anybody, and least of all James, but this is the second part of a four-parter which took place over a roller coaster 3 days down in the Kansai region. And yeah, that's right, isn't it? Yeah. Second part of a 3-day trip. That's easy enough, isn't it?
That was pretty smooth, pretty smooth, Phil. It was almost if you practiced it. Not too shabby, actually. I think our listeners.
You know what it sounded a bit like? Do you know what it sounded a bit like? It sounded a little bit like we'd recorded it once, and then my microphone had been in the wrong setting, so we'd gone back to the start and re-recorded it again.
Wow,
it had that feel to it, but obviously
perfect description. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It's exactly what it would have sounded like if that had happened. Yeah, amazing.
So anyway. We're still in Kansai and we're still on day one. So this is obviously the second of a four-parter, but for us, it's still relatively early in the day. We've already hit Jazz on Top. We've hit Dear Lord. We've hit Bud. And the next place up is Clifford. Now, there was a little controversy around Clifford. Would that be a fair comment?
Well, I would say, there's a lot more controversy coming after Clifford, but no, I would say Clifford caused us to have some consternation in the sense that I felt it had everything that you would identify as making up a jazz kissa. And yet, for reasons that are still rather mysterious, the owner was quite clear in saying, oh, no, this isn't a jazz kissa. Philip, how would you describe, well, first of all, okay, I think anybody listening to the program can guess the origin of the name Clifford. So, of course, it's Clifford Brown. And when you come into this small, tiny, very, very old, cafe, right on the wall on the right side, in a prominent place, is a photographed, a framed album cover of Clifford Brown. So, we walked in and I was thinking, okay, great. This is beautiful. This is your typical, I believe you referred to it as being like, going in a time machine. It's the couple have owned Clifford since 1983, but the structure predates it back to the 60s. And so we sit down, we get our coffee and a very nice piece of cheesecake I have in my notes here.
That's right. The cheesecake was very good. Yeah, it was a cheesecake coffee special.
She was quite proud of it, too.
Something you can often say, right, about Jazz Kissa.
No. And she was very quick to say that that's sort of the house specialty. And so, we sat down. We had the place to ourselves. We looked around. Again, really old. You've got the old payphone. You've got today's newspaper on the counter, which customers can just come in and read. I mean, think about that, Philip. Who reads a physical copy of a newspaper anymore in a coffee shop? Like, this is one of the only types of places you can see that.
And it felt like that neighborhood place where I would say the majority of people coming in were locals who were known and came in for that reason. Like, I mean, outside the building, like you said already, is quite an old 60s building, and you really see that because all around are these, very new, much higher, modern kind of mansion apartment type buildings. So it's on this corner, so it really has this corner neighborhood diner kind of feel to it. And when you go in again, all the interior, the walls are all wooden, and they had these really kind of strange lights, which were these kind of like a rectangular steel case with these really big, large sort of light bulbs that like in another setting would have been very good for like interrogation. That it was that sort of style of lighting. And behind the counter, which was again presumably the original counter, was the old guy and then his wife, both of whom were wearing masks. She was on the other side where she does the customer service, and it just had this. It was almost like a film set. It had this kind of dinery film set feel. I think when we were there, maybe one customer came in, sat down at the other end of that counter, but it was essentially just you and I and this one customer, right? And in true James fashion, and which is one of those times where I think, sometimes it's nice not to be going to these places on my own, because like obviously some of the trip I'm going on my own, and it's up to me to do all the chat and the banter, and then also take the photographs. But on this occasion, you were dispatched to the counter, and I mean, apart from the physical comedy of this enormous foreign man wearing a Nefertiti t-shirt towering over this little old Japanese woman with a mask on and trying to explain what the hell we were doing and why. And this is where the kind of slight controversy, not between you and I, but more between us and them, came up, because I think you in that spiel had mentioned something along the lines of it being a jazz kisa, and the man was very quick to refute that. No, this is not a jazz kisa. And you sort of said, okay, right. But the name then, Clifford, is that from? And he was like, oh, Clifford Brown. And you're like, right, okay, so it's named after Clifford Brown. And then you sort of turned politely to the left, and there's a wall full of jazz pictures and jazz record covers.
I'm as we're talking, I'm looking back at some of the pictures that I snapped, and in addition to into the Clifford Brown album, you've got on the wall, and I'm not even going to read all of them because there's so many. You've got a Bill Evans album, Miles Davis, Red Garland, Coltrane on Prestige. These are all very famous jazz albums that you see in a lot of the Kisaten. Jimmy Smith, Lou Donaldson, Lee Morgan. You've got two JBL speakers,
Oh, yeah.
up on the wall, mounted on the wall, over the door, over the entry. Okay, so everything about the place screams, yeah, this is a jazz kisa.
And they were playing jazz, right?
And they were playing jazz and serving coffee. So I think there was definitely enough evidence, on our side, but, trying to think about why he would say that. And it's, Philip, I think there might be a couple things in play. There could be this sort of regional element to it. I think listeners of ours who spent a lot of time in Japan or live in Japan will know that Osaka has a very, very different history and very different character to Tokyo. Some would say it's slightly rougher, a bit of history, and certainly has that reputation even today. So part of me might think of like, okay, this very kind couple, they run a neighborhood kisa. Again, you said surrounded by like mansion apartment buildings and office buildings. So perhaps they don't want to be labeled as a jazz kisa, which has the image of perhaps being in, the rougher night streets, the nighttime area, or shady characters, whatever. They just want to be identified as your neighborhood kisa, your neighborhood cafe, where everybody is a regular. That's probably what he would have been thinking. But again, who knows? Maybe I'm just speculating.
Well, yeah, because and this came up, and we'll touch on this in a later joint in this episode, but this came up a few times on this trip. And I think it seemed to me, I mean, it was comical because it was like, is this a jazz kisa? No. Is it named after Clifford Brown? Yes. Is that Clifford Brown on the wall? Yes. Is it a jazz kisa? No. And you just sort of, in the end, I think you just decided to leave it. But there was definitely this sense that like jazz kisa carries with it a certain atmosphere that's maybe certainly darker in the sense of like literally darker, and also, maybe less sociable, quite a heavy, serious kind of atmosphere. And like you say, yes, I think for them, it was very much like a neighborhood place, right? It was and where people come in on the way to work to get their coffee and.
As you mentioned, the lighting in there is, I mean, it was bright, man. There was very serious wattage going on with that lighting. And so that plus the regular, the older gentleman that came in reading the newspaper, the manner of the couple definitely gave it that more, we're just a neighborhood kisa. Even the opening hours, because they opened really early and I think they closed at 4 or 5, which is,
I think it was close. Yeah, you might be right. I think it was maybe 4, because I remember us thinking, we need to get there. I'm just looking at the photos that we have. It's 3:40. One of the photos that I took when we were there. So it might have been 4. Which again, may explain, right, why. I mean, they have toast and things on the menu, so it could be that it's more of a lunchtime or people on their way to work kind of place. But definitely, it wasn't like they weren't settling in for a late night listening session by any means. Yeah, but interesting place. And again, just you kind of wonder
quite
how
visually striking too. I mean, I thought the exterior of Clifford was just beautiful, being that, like you mentioned, this is in the middle of like downtown Osaka, but it's a crazy old building and it's got a really beautiful sign out front. just perfect, where it says Clifford both in English and in katakana script. So I think it's a place. Look, at the end of the day, the fact that we're talking about it means that we're calling it a jazz spot, even if the owner doesn't agree with us, which I think is probably okay. I don't think. Do you think he's listening? You think he's going to listen to this episode, Philip? Or I probably think we're safe, right?
Well, I mean, technically it's not what you'd be putting on a jazz kisa, but then as we've established, it's not a jazz kisa. So the one thing that threw me, actually, and I'm just looking at it now on the photos, and this is where initially I was like, this has got to be maybe this is where the name came from, despite the evidence on the walls. But there's actually a big sticker on the coffee machine which says also the only thing I noticed at the time was Clifford Base, so I thought it was something to do with the US Army. But actually, when I look at it now, it's a sticker that says Osaka University of Arts Headquarters, Operation 50th Clifford Base. So I wonder if that is something to do with its 50th anniversary of, which would make sense. No, 83 wouldn't be 50 years, but I don't know what that's all about. But maybe it was at one point like a gathering point for students from that university or something like that. I don't know.
I mean, the area would have changed so much, because if you and I know you got shots of the exterior, you'll be able to see that this particular small building has zero in common with all of the buildings around it.
Yeah, it's totally different, right? Yeah.
It reminds me of those, like, sometimes when you're walking in downtown Manhattan, and you'll come around a corner and you'll just find a real old dive bar or diner that somehow survived amidst all of the rebuilding. Sadly rarer and rarer in New York, but in Osaka, every Japanese city, you still have a lot of them. So that's sort of like the vibe of it. And I mean, honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if next time we're down in Osaka that it's not even open anymore. I got the feeling that the couple were pretty old and ready to probably retire, or at least sell that land if they own the building. But I hope we can get back there again, and maybe next time we can dive in a little deeper, pull out the microphone and be like, so Tencho, can you tell me, why do you not consider your shop a jazz kisa?
Yes.
Go all 60 minutes on them.
Yeah, nice to see a no mobile phone sticker on the door too. Always a fan of that. Anyway, so that was Clifford. Still to be resolved. Was it a jazz kisa or not? We would say yes. The owner was categorical in the fact that it wasn't. But anyway, lovely coffee. Lovely piece of cake, and it was just in and around about the right time, because I think we were maybe headed to one more place, and then we took a short break, I think. Did we? Or maybe did we go back to the hotel, or we just keep going? I don't even remember now.
No. We kept going, and speaking of controversy, I think this is one of the great controversies we ever had in the Tokyo Jazz Joints adventure, Philip. We popped into a place, and it was just about that time of the day to stop drinking coffee, at least in my case, and order a beer. Already feeling a little tired from the early start, and it was a new joint called Long Walk. And okay, I'll start this off. So walk into Long Walk, maybe not the most visually striking place, pleasant enough cafe. He's got a Sarah Vaughan record playing. Looks like they've got a good beer selection. He's got a lot of records around as well. I see a couple of non-jazz albums out there too, some rock albums. He's got a big poster from the Lounge Lizards. So we settled down, order in the first beer of the night, and Philip, you dropped the bomb. I'm not taking any pictures in here. This isn't a jazz joint.
Yeah. I stand by it. I mean, there's no discussion. There's no discussion. Well, okay. Look, here's the thing, right? This place was recommended by the owner of Bud, or at least he said, "Oh, you should try this place."
As a new joint, yes.
Yeah, and it had elements of it, right? But I would say it's probably closer to maybe one or two of these places that are starting to spring up around the world outside Japan. I mean, it had elements of a jazz kisa. It had, in some ways, the atmosphere of it. But I would say if you were to take records out of the equation, it wasn't necessarily particularly different to, a standard kind of new trendier bar. And although there were jazz records and he did play a couple when we were there was a lot of other stuff up on the wall. There were like Stones records, there was like some folk stuff, and he was quite, like, it wasn't like he was masquerading. I mean, we got chatting to the owner. I don't know if you remember, he was quite a young guy, and he dropped his own bombshell that actually he was half British, but he couldn't speak any English at all. So we didn't dig into that family history much. But he said, "Oh, my dad's British."
I remember he was definitely a unique looking guy. He kind of stood out a bit, and that also explained the gigantic Union Jack hanging on one wall by a window.
Of course, I forgot about that.
You don't usually see those in a jazz key set, but
exactly.
It's funny going back to the pictures. I think ultimately, Philip, that is a good description. It's similar to a lot of cafes that have been opening in Japan and around the world, where there's a lot of vinyl, a really good sound system too. Maybe a little bit less on the nighttime listening bar side and more on the daytime good coffee and a lot of art books and photo books on the shelves type.
Probably
cafe.
Good food as well. It's this kind of you probably get a nice curry in there at lunch or like a nice salad or, whatever, like a rice dish or something. It was definitely that kind of place for me. But you were not for backing down on that one. I mean, you were
I think the thing is I think what it was is when I went to look more carefully at a lot of the albums that he had, and yes, he did have a lot of rock and outside jazz as well, but he had some pretty deep jazz records in there too. And so that's why I was thinking, okay, this isn't just BGM where he's going to be playing, Nora Jones or whatever. He's got like a proper record collection of jazz albums in here, and he's got the sound system. So, and it just, when we walked in, honestly, that first impression, like he's playing Sarah Vaughan, that's deep enough, So
it's funny. It's deep enough when it suits you. I mean, you're never done slagging off vocal jazz, but when it suits your argument that it's definitely a jazz case, all of a sudden he's all over the vocal jazz. Wow.
Vocal jazz
what a climb
is still
down.
Jazz, even if I don't particularly enjoy it. I wouldn't say it doesn't come under the rubric of jazz. It's just not my vibe.
Fine.
Listen, I added it to my own individual list of jazz spots visited, even if we're not including it in volume 2 of the Tokyo Jazz Joints photo book to come in, what year is it? 2020, I guess. Yeah.
I mean, it would be hard to include it at this point because I can't even find a photo. Must have been so outraged. I haven't even got a photo of it on my phone. There's like no evidence that I was ever there. Anyway.
But a nice guy, and if you're in Osaka, stop by there. Yeah, I really liked the place anyway. It was good to have a pit stop for a beer, and it was fun to like sort of chat about, like, oh gosh, Philip, it's kind of strange though, because this was what, 165th place we've been to, and I think it's the first one where that question really came up. I mean, we knew the older joints would not, cause such a controversy, but we've been to some more, recently opened places too, but I don't think we ever really maybe disagreed on them. I think we always were in line at either yes or no, but this one we kind of wavered on,
Yeah, I mean, it was further than that. It's way up. It's higher up in the 180s or somewhere around there. But I mean, there's a couple that we've been to, I think, in the early days that I didn't photograph. I can't remember the name of that one that I just felt like.
There's a couple of Vagabond.
It had quite a strange name.
Yes.
There's a couple. Windjammer was another one, but but generally, like, I mean, it's a case of like, well, okay, or it's difficult to photograph or something. But I think this occasion, I just felt like, this could be a slippery slope if you open the door to this as being included. But we didn't fall out about it. We stayed friends just about, and made a beeline for the next place, which was a very, very, well, in a strange way, kind of linked in some ways to this Long Walk place, because actually it was a very new, very modern place. And I mean, it was just a gorgeous, gorgeous bar. It was called Bar Jazz, which, really does what it says on the tin.
We took a taxi back into the center of town, and we went and we had some okonomiyaki, and then we wandered into the neighborhood's called Shinsaibashi, which is probably the biggest entertainment neighborhood in all of Osaka, which means probably one of the biggest in the world. I mean, it's just a maze of wide streets, side streets, and alleyways, and just hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands, of places to eat and drink. and bar jazz is kind of in the like courtyard of a more recently built building.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, that's kind of what I meant. I think it's the courtyard feel because it's actually like it along along the whole side of the bar is like glass windows that you can see out, right? So it has that kind of more like an actual shop feel, right, rather than an enclosed bar. Is that fair?
Yes, definitely. And I mean, it's really funny because it's like the polar opposite of Clifford in a way, because it's called bar jazz, and yet when you walk in, it feels more like, yeah, I guess a little bit similar, like a nighttime version of Long Walk that we just talked about. It's one of the few places I've ever been in that's got a plentiful amount of plants, which I just obviously, in these days, the places, a lot of them are non-smoking, so that's probably good. But it's got the big glass windows. It's got the beautiful wooden L counter, and the furniture. I mean, I'm not an interior decorator, obviously. How would you describe the decor of bar jazz though? Like modern. I don't know, what would you call it? Modern natural chic. It felt very organic. A lot of wood, a lot of plants, a lot of lamps that looks like they came from Thailand. Just a beautiful mixture, all surrounding this counter where he had a whole rack of records, but not the usual Jazzkeeper records. One of the other things about bar jazz that really stuck out was how much contemporary music. In fact, I think he was only playing contemporary releases, right?
Yeah, I mean, it was. I mean, I'd say the interior to me looked. If you kind of disregard the bar and the enormous collection of bottles, it almost had an apartment feel to it. Like it was a kind of a pretty funky kind of apartment. There's actually like I think what is a fridge down at one end, down with the speakers. Like you say, lots of plants, a couple of places to sit, cushions, tables, nice chairs, a few stacks of records here and there, and the roof is got that. The pipes are exposed, so it has that kind of loft apartment feel to it. So it was a very funky place. And yeah, I think the only photo that I have of the records, he had a pretty sizable collection of both bottles and records. But the one that I took a picture of in particular was the Robert Glasper one. So he was playing largely modern tunes and quite loudly, if I remember as well. Like he wasn't skimping on the volume, but it was a couple that seemed to run it. And again, they were very friendly, interested in what we were doing. A few business cards and whatnot were exchanged, I think. And we got there quite early. I'm just looking at the photos now, and the timestamp is around 7. So yeah, we had some food, and we must have got there just for opening, because again, it was one of those places that as soon as a few customers would come in, you'd pretty much be impossible to photograph in, because there just weren't that many angles. But I'm glad that we caught it just in time, because it was such a gorgeous place to go, like, and very much like a modern version.
On a Friday, it would definitely be packed. So I think that's why we had it on the list to let's get an early bit of grub in and then get there right when they open. And I just was pulling out their Meishi, their business card, and of course it's got the address and the phone number and a QR code on one side, but the other side is just a very simple font that says Bar Jazz with a simple ink drawing of a cat holding
the cat. Yeah.
You remember that?
Yeah.
So it's definitely they've definitely been very, very they took a lot of care, I think, in putting together the concept of the bar. And I remember the owner telling me a little bit about how, it was difficult because you got people who, and we know this from Tokyo, Philip, and from people who we know all around in the scene, a lot of people in the jazz scene, they would associate a jazz bar with being similar to what we just described at Clifford. You know what I mean? Or a really like kind of hoity-toity whiskey bar at night with the lights down low. So people that are very different demographics. But he was saying that, when they came up with the concept for this joint, they wanted to make it a place where people could go to, say, a gig of somebody like Robert Glasper and then go out for drinks afterwards in a similar type of place with similar music. And I think in all of our travels around the country, that's not very common, actually, in Japan. This pretty strict divide between the generations and the types of jazz that people listen to. So finding a joint like this, it reminded me, I just just remembered. Yeah, it reminded me a little bit of bar music in Shibuya, run by
Right, yeah, it
Nakamura.
had that
So
vibe.
definitely that same kind of vibe, same kind of like multi-genre and multi-generational selection of tunes. So, yeah, I loved it. I thought it was wonderful, and I was so happy that we got to go there. I mean, yeah, again, the name maybe not the most imaginative in the world, but what are you gonna do?
It's definitely the least imaginative part or least creative part about the whole setup. One of the things that stood out to me was there was like a black kind of silhouette type statue of Jamiroquai down at one end in sort of a nod to,
right, yes,
to a more
that's
modern
right.
era, right? On top of the
Yes.
bridge.
Yeah, that's right. There was a little Jamiroquai like cutout statue, and I was immediately drawn to the batik pattern pillows because that's one of the few things I do like to decorate with for my.
So it's like many of the shirts,
Batik,
that you wear. Yes.
Many.
Another thing as well, just to underline that connection and perhaps a sense of that younger community that, are doing their own thing and finding their own paths, but yet kind of connecting with this, traditional jazz kisa culture was they had some products from that Atelier Sawano, the handmade jazz label. And actually, I don't know if you remember, they were encouraging us to go over to that. I think it's called the Shinsekai district, which is like a shoe shop and a Shotengai where this label's run out of it. Now we planned to go maybe try and make it down the next day, but we didn't unfortunately get down at the end. But they were promoting their stuff and they had some of it up on display. And so you get that sense that, it's not this. They're not this island, they're kind of connected a bit more to modern music, the modern scene, and other places that are doing similar jazz related stuff, which again bodes well for the future, right?
Oh, certainly is. I mean, really, really happy to see it. And I know from reading comments online that they do have a lot of fans. So I would think that the next time that I'm in town there, it should still be open. So yeah, bar jazz, absolutely great. Interestingly though, Philip, we talked about all the contemporary touches, but they don't have their own website. When you look it up online, it's basically just their Facebook page. That seems to be the only bit of online
that's quite That's quite contemporary, James.
Oh,
that's quite contemporary. That is contemporary.
Was that
the young ones? The young ones don't do
the
young ones don't do websites now. It's all about social media, you say.
Thank you, Mr. Edward.
Don't do website. Don't do email. It's all about the DMs. It's all about the social media. And that doesn't surprise me, actually. No, genuinely, because, I think like a lot of places don't bother with websites because if you think where you get a lot of your information, a lot of it's shared now, it's mostly done through social medias. I mean, social media platforms, right? I mean, you go to websites, yes, we do, and I love a website, but I think now like the probably the traffic and the traction that you get on that is probably not worth it in terms of like, especially for instant updates, like if you want to, we're open late today, or we're closing early, or this is on, or whatever, it seems to be done, so
yeah. Well, it won't
maybe more contemporary than we realize.
I've not utilized the QR code on the Meisha yet, so maybe I'll do that after we stop recording tonight.
Have you been photographing it multiple times, trying to work out how to do it?
So where did we head to after bar jazz then? Stayed in Shinsai.
I'm reminded of someone telling me a story about finding all these QR codes on their parents' phone during COVID because their parents had been going and when they were doing things like track and trace, instead of scanning the QR code, they'd just been pointing the camera at it and photographing the code instead. So it's just this album full of QR codes rather than actually ever having been scanned. But anyway, well, look, where we went next was, I think, really, to me, like emblematic of the ups and downs of this project, because we were looking for a place called Kunos, Kuno''S, and we walked around to it. We eventually located it on one of these, like you said, one of these huge shop signs with, like multiple units listed on it and multiple units on multiple floors and things like that. And when we got up, unfortunately, the only thing that we found was quite a detailed sign, I must say, because I'm just looking at it now. It has the opening hours. It says very clearly, Kuno's Mellow Sensation, which could be misread. It says disc play only, no lives, so they don't do any live music. Opened in 1985, and a couple of kind of quite tantalizing pictures of the inside, which looks big, it looks quite grand, it looks really nicely appointed. But unfortunately, the only thing that we found was this large steel door that was closed and just had this sign on it, right? And we did not get in.
Well, but what was interesting is, the sign outside was still there. The door was still in place with the very intricate sign in front of it up on, I think it was the 4th or 5th floor of one of these buildings. And all the investigations online didn't show any site referring to it as being permanently closed. So we were thinking, okay, maybe we do know that there's been some places who, stayed closed since the COVID outbreak. Small businesses in Japan got a little bit of aid money for about 2 years. And so I know that some small establishments like just kept that and stayed closed or decided to retire. But there was no sign of that. And then I remember, Philip, on the same floor as Kuno's, there seemed to be this kind of, I don't know, it was very bright. It was a really bright reception area, but it was actually a karaoke parlor. And I walked just down the hall, to ask them about Kuno's. Like, hey, your neighbor here, what's going on? Like, what time do they usually come? Philip, again, I might as well have been speaking like Kazakh or Turkmen to these young girls, the way that they looked at me. I mean, they looked at me like I had just like sort of teleported into the room out of nowhere, because it was just so shocking to them that a foreign guy would come in speaking Japanese. And so I took them a good 15 seconds to actually answer me. I thought I wasn't communicating at all. And finally, I said it again. I said, look, we're trying to go to the jazz bar right there. Like the shop that is literally right next to yours. Is it still open or not? And they was all this like consternation. And anybody who spent time in Japan will know this sort of like low mumbling and rustling and like, as if we were asking them to like crack the Da Vinci Code or something. I mean, it was just, at this point of the day, I had no more patience for this kind of stuff. I remember being extremely irritated, and I wrote it down in my notes. Very annoying young women. But finally, they said, that shop next door? No, we haven't seen them in a while. And I was like, oh, okay. So are they closed? Are they not closed? Do deliveries come? And they were like, oh, well, we really don't know. So I was like, okay, fine. I left. And I called the number one more time just to see if maybe, if there'd been some mistake. Maybe I dialed the wrong one, but it was not connecting. So we could only conclude that it closed down. But Philip, this was 4 months ago. Prepping for tonight's recording, I got online to look around. Still no notice anywhere. And usually you can find it on some of the jazz blogs, or even just the city directories, or Tabelog, or any of these things, Hot Pepper, anywhere that lists up places to eat and drink in Japan. There's tons of resources online. And when places close, it'll come up with the Hey Denmark in Chinese characters. Can't find it anywhere. So the mystery still continues. I did text a friend in Osaka to ask if he could ask around, because to be honest, I really want to know what happened to Kuno's. You mentioned that it looked very spacious inside. Not just spacious, it looked like kind of like a lounge. You know what I mean? With
it's quite grand.
Seats. Grand is a great word. Yeah. So I really wanted to visit, and I still want to visit, but I just don't know what the mystery is with Kuno.
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating to me. I mean, this is something you encounter a lot in Japan. I think it's probably indicative of maybe the size of cities, or also just the way that people carve out personal space and by sort of blocking out what's around them, because it's not uncommon, say, to go into like a neighborhood convenience store in many cases and ask directions, and no one can tell you. And often that's because the people working there are maybe not from that neighborhood. And obviously it's Japan. Tokyo, for example, is an enormous city. It doesn't have a layout in terms of like street names and street and numbers in that same way, so it can be confusing. But again, it just is amazing to me that like in possibly months or longer, that people have been working right next door to this place. Like no one has either thought, I wonder if that's closed permanently, or seen any activity, or even to say to you, even, oh, you actually, a few other people were in asking the same thing or something. So there was just we got no more sense of, how long it's been closed, whether it's really closed or not, like from asking people who probably have the most access to that front door, other than
there was one elevator, one small hallway. So you would have to go to the karaoke shop, you'd have to pass this Kuno's every single time, twice a day at least, right? So you've seen nothing, you've heard nothing. There's not even a delivery person or a real estate person. Oh, Philip, Tokyo Jazz Joints flashback. Do you remember in Yokohama when we were looking for another mysterious place, Little John, which never seemed to be open, and we asked at the kind of restaurant downstairs, literally
yes,
right below it,
yes, yeah.
and they gave us like such an attitude about it, like, oh, I don't know.
Yeah, I remember that. God, that is a throwback. Well, look, perhaps if there's anyone listening that, if we have any listeners in Osaka and this rings any bells to you, have heard anything, or you even want to take a wander around some evening if you're in that area, let us know. It'd be great to kind of solve that mystery. But we have nothing at the moment other than a photograph of the door. And after that, I think, possibly to assuage your irritation, or possibly just because it was the end of quite a long day, at around 7:30 or 8, we ended up in Bird 56. Now, we're probably not going to dwell too long on Bird 56 because we have referenced it a few times, and obviously more recently the sad passing of Natori-san, the owner. But I think in hindsight, what a way to finish the day, and what a chance for not only us to go together, but just to kind of wrap up the day in the correct fashion. There's a couple of things that stood out to me, just beyond the amazing place that Bird 56.
Philip, before you say that, we almost didn't go, because I remember saying something like, "Oh, well, we can hit that. We're here for a few nights. We don't have to hit it tonight. If you're tired, maybe we'll go somewhere else." And I could easily imagine us not getting there and then having this horrible news. So I'm really, really happy that we did get the chance to go in, and it was fairly quiet. Well, maybe a little bit when we first got in, about half an hour. Then it got a little more crowded, including I think you made a new friend as well at the bar. Do you remember?
It got a little boisterous, but there was a man who will be forever enshrined on the Instagram stories, who was sat at the bar, an older gentleman with a very full head of grey hair slicked back and a jacket that read, and I quote, "Create your lifestyle, live for the moment, hot scoop." And that was the hot scoop of the night. Another hot scoop of the evening actually was just by pure, just one of those, lovely kind of coincidences and weird little things that we tend to come across on this mad journey is a while back when I moved to Belfast, I met a couple called John and Mary Alice. John's from Belfast, Mary Alice is from the States, and they obviously, for some reason, are listeners of your podcast. And I think when they'd been out in Japan previously, they had met you. And when I got back to Belfast, Mary Alice had contacted me to buy a print from the Tokyo Jazz Joints project of Bird 56, which is obviously one of the places that they had gone when they visited Japan themselves. And just by pure coincidence, the table that we sat down on, which was a new addition since we had both previously been there was a wall where people had started to kind of sign their names and sign the date that they'd been in Bird 56. And it took me a moment to focus in, but just randomly beside me, I suddenly focused in. It was like, I saw the word Belfast and I was like, oh, wow, Belfast. And then of course, up above it was Mary Alice and John, and they'd been there on the 20th of June, 2019. So it's just one of those mad little sort of Easter egg things again that, we tend to stumble on now and again. And in all these different layers of experiences in the Jazz Kisa. And next to that actually was another thing, and you might know more about this, but I noticed a flyer that was stuck up there that was called the Lockdown Jazz Kisa Festival. Next to it was a really nice sticker, which I'm glad I only photographed, but perhaps in hindsight of what's happened to Bird 56 as well, I wish I'd asked if there was any spare, because it's a gorgeous sticker called Save the Jazz Kisa. I don't know if you remember that sticker. You were a few beers in that by that point, but it just says on the left of it, Treasure of Jazz Kisa 2020. Do you know anything about that festival or the stickers or anything like that?
That must be a Kansai West Japan thing, because it's not something I'd heard about. It doesn't ring a bell at all. If it's 2020, it could be because you remember by the end of 2020 here in Japan, now it wasn't, we say lockdown, it wasn't really government mandated. It was more voluntary. But in any case, a lot of smaller shops did really start to feel the pinch by the end of 2020. So it's very likely that there could have been a group of supporters and fans and owners coming together to maybe do some events. I mean, I remember a lot of places here in the Tokyo and Yokohama area, they either did live streams or they started selling goods, merchandise, T-shirts, Downbeat, Eagle, Candy. They all started selling T-shirts and things like that. So there were initiatives to like come together, and that's probably what that would be. But it's just not one that I remember. Yeah,
it says actually it's actually sponsored by Way Out West. The ticket. I noticed the ticket hasn't been used, or it hasn't had the little shit at the bottom ripped off it, but it is sponsored by Way Out West. So it must have been an initiative by them at the time
okay. That
get
makes perfect
some sort
sense.
of,
yeah.
I don't know how to, I don't know, maybe to get some money into the Jazz Kisa somehow or something. Like you say, there wasn't that same lockdown that we experienced in other countries where we simply couldn't, nothing was open, right? So you couldn't really do anything other than being online. But yeah, just thought it was an interesting thing.
Okay, that logo you just sent me makes sense because that's definitely the same artwork of the Way Out West jazz. What would you call it, Way Out West? It's a jazz pamphlet, or it's like a monthly.
Yeah.
A monthly small free magazine that documents the jazz scene in Western Japan. So gigs, album releases, jazz kisa profiles, etc. So yeah, that's definitely the same guy doing the artwork. So yeah,
his name is Takao Fujioka, and actually
Fujioka-san, yes, of course,
yeah,
of course.
And he is obviously we mentioned him previously because he has quite a few. There's quite a few of his prints are up in the beautiful Paragonian that we mentioned. And funny enough, looking on Takao Fujioka-san's on his Instagram, I noticed not too long ago he was at Jazz. He was at Bud House. So there you go. It's all connected.
Oh, nice. Great.
It's all connected.
Yeah.
So listen, that was the end of a very long day. And I do have a little sound clip that we took on the way back. I sound like I've smoked about 100 cigarettes that day. I was feeling pretty rough. If you remember, I had like some serious sinus thing going on, but it was a pretty intense, full-on day, but very rewarding, I would say. Apart from really the disappointment of Kunos, it was a fabulous day and very successful day one of a day 3 trip, wouldn't you say?
Oh, I mean, it was amazing, and especially because I think it worked out really good too, Philip. Because we've documented on I think 3 or 4 episodes back now, but you had a real perilous journey just to get to Japan, well delayed, and then we had our reunion the next morning. You were straight up to Tohoku. So by the time we got down to Osaka, you were still feeling the effects of a little bit of jet lag and travel, but definitely the energy was back up, and so we were able to hit the ground running. And it was an absolutely fantastic day. I remember thinking, getting back to the hotel, like, wow, how many joints did we visit today? Was it 5, 6, 7? If you count the one that was closed.
We just see this morning.
10 o'clock, a bit earlier than expected. Long day. I've developed a cough, which is a combination of jet lag, hay fever, and a lot of smoke in Bird 56. What a way to finish.
Thoughts? I'm enjoying my non-train beer on the way back to the hotel.
Yep.
Ibis budget. I'm
Lovely.
assuming our room will be about the size of my closet.
That's
my
nice, so
Japanese
it'll be
house.
clean. Clean and lovely.
Ready for a shower and some basketball updates, and a big Twitter poll coming soon because a lot of controversy today about what is or is not a jazz bar. Everybody's going to be on the edge of their seat for that one.
Thrilling stuff.
And
Thrilling stuff.
Yeah, just in case you didn't have enough of middle-aged men wandering through the streets of Osaka, looking at jazz bars and taking inappropriate pictures.
I mean, if you haven't had enough, this is only day 1, so there's a bit more to come. Stay tuned.
Don't forget, everyone, get your love tea ready.
I mean, that's a great start to the trip. And, obviously we still have a lot more to come. Now, tell me again, this is episode part 1 of a 4-day, 3-part, 2-3-day trip, something like that.
Right. Just to be clear, this is part two of a This is part two of a four-parter, and I think what we should maybe do is wrap it up there, and we'll try as best as we can to stick to the days, I think. So that was day one, and that was the two parts that took us. You rightly said, including the one that was closed, it was actually 8 places that day. And the following day, then we set out...
Was it 8, really?
It was, yeah. And we set out the following day for... Jazz on Top, Bud House, Dear Lord, Clifford, Long Walk, Bar Jazz, Kunos, and Bird. Is that 8?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's
right.
Yeah. And we forgot to mention the very tasty local okonomiyaki delicacy. We snuck in as well. You've got to eat that when you're down in Osaka.
I'm surprised you didn't make me photograph that, because they might have played a jazz song at one point. So now that's a jazz kisa as well. Anyway. So listen, we're going to wrap up there, and in the next episode, we're going to pick it up on day 2. Day 2, we headed out to Kobe, which is not a huge distance from Osaka, and it felt like in that particular day, it felt like we were in about 3 or 4 very, very different places on account of a couple of train rides and a very eventful bus ride, if you remember. So that might be a nice way to pick it up.
Speaking of cigarettes, whew. Well, we'll get to that in the next episode.
Exactly. Well, listen, it's been a pleasure as always. It's great to relive these memories, and it's great to also share it with so many people. Thanks as ever for supporting and listening to our ramblings. We'll be back in a couple of weeks' time with episode 59. And in the meantime, James, go crack another beer. Enjoy that heat. It's actually sunny here today, so I'm experiencing a little bit.
I got an early start tomorrow, so I'm still supporting local business here. I've got an Orion, the great Okinawan brewery, but I'm drinking an Orion Clear Free. It's 0% alcohol. Yes,
Who would have thought it?
Philip, you put a little bit of lime juice in there, and you can almost convince yourself you're drinking a Dos Equis or a Modelo. So it's not too bad.
All sponsorship welcome. Right, James, I will talk to you soon. All the best.
Bye-bye.
Bye.